you'll see that what I've done is I have painted a lot of the metal on here. One of the tricks is to actually get an old metal feel, to use a very dark metallic paint and then rather do what is called an overbrush, which I will explain very shortly. What I used is burnt iron, and that actually gives you this very dark metallic color. If I can actually get it closer with some light, you'll notice a very dark color there. Here I've painted what would be lead belcher or steel, and you can see it's almost silver like, where over here it's the dark metal. But now we'll bring that to life very soon. What I also did is I put in my regimental colors on the side, because I'm actually going to do a wash now on the metallic parts. I also did brassy brass over here. I also painted some white on the missiles inside there, and then used the dark metal around it. I was forced to obviously do the white first, otherwise it doesn't work too well. In the same way, I've also painted the skulls on the manifolds there, and I painted them in off-white. If you do a pure white, you don't have much to play with. You can at least with an off-white highlight in white later, and I needed to do that because I'm going to wash over all of this. Right, that said, there are 3 washes that are absolutely phenomenal that Game Workshop actually produces, that I've just never come across anywhere else. They work like they have magic ingredient. There's nuln oil, which is what they recommend for most of the metals. There is Agrax Earth Shade, which is great for shading rocks and stuff, but also really good for certain colors, to where something like the nuln oil would be too dark to highlight any of these other areas on the vehicle. And Reichland Flesh Shade, which although you'd use mainly with the characters, is also great, especially if you've got a very light camo pattern like I've got here, any light earthy colors. It works far better than a dark one would. And there you go, there's the Flesh Shade, and there's the Earth Shade. But this nuln oil, absolutely fantastic, which is what I'm going to use right now. And I use an older brush to actually do this. For the metal, I'd actually used a number 1 brush, which I find usually the easiest to use, either number 1 or number 2. So now, one of the methods of actually doing a wash is what they call a full wash, which you do on a lot of the characters, where you're just painting in and you let it get into all the different nooks and crannies. The other way of doing the washes is to do what they call a point wash, where you're being very careful in terms of exactly where you put it. I have to be a bit careful here because I don't want it to go absolutely everywhere, but at the same time I'm not having to be really picky. When I come to doing each of those individual rivets, which I'll use another wash for, that's when you're doing a point wash. One of the tricks to making your own washes, which I've done, I've still never come out with anything as great as this nuln oil, is, there you go, you can use a drop, and I mean a single drop of dishwashing liquid in your wash, and what that does is break the surface tension, and that's what allows a good wash to get into all those crevices. Now if I actually do the detail work, very much like with the metallic paints, I will use a cheap brush. So now, well, the wash has been put on and it's been given enough time to dry. Very important that the wash be totally dry before you do dry brushing. Now what I'm going to be using for the dry brushing is this small to medium at best dry brush, because there's a lot of detail areas I have to get to. Now overbrushing is where you try and get large portions covered. Very good for cleaning up on models where you've actually done a wash and yet you want to clean up some of the larger areas, and what you're doing is you're just leaving the wash in the crevices. Dry brushing, as opposed to that, although similar, you do it much lighter and you try to just get the edges, just to highlight the edges and bring those out. So now in this case, where it comes to the tracks, it's a bit of a balance between am I dry brushing or am I over brushing, but it's more dry brushing than anything else. Now an excellent thing to bring out this metal, now that you've used a very dark metal to make it look realistic, I could recommend the Necron compound, which is dry, and it's very good. However, I find I get better control, this is a personal thing, if I actually use something like chainmail silver, which is a normal paint. So I'm going to be using chainmail silver in this instance. The idea, if you've never done dry brushing, is so important to get your models to actually up to spec, to use a good dry brushing technique. Just make sure that you've covered at least the tip of your brush. What I use very often, and this might give you a chuckle, is a brick covered in terry cloth. And what I do is I effectively wipe off whatever I put on the brush. And just to show you there, I'm getting virtually no paint off that brush whatsoever, which means it's ready. If you can lightly go over this, and I'll show you the difference between the two sides once I've done a little bit more of this, and you'll see how it actually makes the rivets pop and all the edges stand out. I am now not putting full pressure on the brush, I'm just letting it go over those high spots. And it gives it a weathered steel look, as opposed to, and I'll show that later when I actually do the gun here, where I painted it with steel, that'll give it more of a weathered stainless steel look. And now you can see the difference between this side and that side, and this looks really nicely weathered, showing you the difference that dry brushing can make. Over here you can see the front wheels that I haven't done the sides yet, and here you can see the rear wheels where I've actually dry brushed the steel. This really makes it all pop out. You can see the individual rivets. It looks like it's slightly weathered steel. Here it's just dark and dull. As you can see, we've now dry brushed all the metallic bits, and some of it's looking quite smart. I would reiterate that the fact I used a very dark metallic paint and then went and did a highlight with a very bright metallic paint has created a look that looks very much like slightly weathered steel. I'm not quite sure how close we can get into this, but let's see if I can give you a close-up look at that. So it no longer looks like somebody's just gone and painted it silver. It actually looks slightly weathered and like steel. Of course, that's helped by the lin oil, which we did as a wash. Even the missile launcher is starting to look good. A lot of that you won't see, but there's some more metallic bits there. Even here you'll notice it's the little details that count. On the exhausts here, I also went and dry brushed the bottom part, but not the top part. That way it looks as if it's been a bit more subject to weathering and smoke at the top, and I'll actually add some more in later, some other effects to actually make that even more prominent. Now I'm going to use one of the other washes. This time I'm going to use a lighter wash, so Agrax Earthshade, and for that I'm going to be doing point washing, which means I have to be reasonably accurate in what I do. So I'll use the number 1 again and start doing that. Here one has to be extremely accurate. You don't want to put too much, too little, but you have to hit every rivet, every spot where there's you'd like a shadow to appear. And any edges to highlight the steel plating. If you put a bit too much, remember, you just dry your brush off and you soak it right back up. It takes a little bit of skill to do this, but really not that much. Well, you can see the difference it made putting that wash on. All the details suddenly pop out at you. So now that we've done the wash and all the areas that were depressed have actually been brought out, now the idea is to do a dry brush and bring out the raised areas. Now I tried a number of things with the colours. I tried some under hive ash, which is a dry paint, a bit too yellow unfortunately. So what I'm going to do here is I'm mixing up some off-white with some sand. Right, very good. And now any angles on the model you also want to bring to light. So by lightly brushing any edges which are not recessed areas, so you wouldn't have caught them, dry brushing has been completed. Here and there I actually highlighted just by running the edge of my brush along the model on sharp edges, just at the top, to create a slight effect of light from above.